Hey everyone, welcome back to Master J Skills. So in this video we are going to dive into the concept called the constructors in Java programming language. Without getting delayed, let's get started with understanding what is the agenda of today's video. So today's video's agenda is we will understand in deep about the constructor with the following points. Like we will understand what exactly the constructors in Java and what are the rules for creating Java constructors and what are the types of constructors. There are mainly default constructors, no argument constructor and parameterized constructor. We will understand each one of them in depth with an example and why exactly we need the constructors in our development and what is the constructor overloading in Java, whether it's really supported in Java or not, and if so, how we can implement it. That we will see in today's video. And whether the copy constructor like C++ it's supported in Java. If it is supported, how we can implement the copy constructor in Java. So we will see constructor chaining in Java and what are the rules to implement a constructor chaining and how to call the constructor from another constructor also we will see. You might be observing there are last 2 points, that is the examples of constructors in Java and last question and answers on constructors in Java. The last session is very important. I have covered all the possible questions which are asked on interview, particularly on constructors. So examples of constructors I'll be putting into another video, and also the interview questions or the question and answers on constructors I'll be putting it into the another video. So that's about the agenda of today's video. And so this is the agenda of today's videos. We will be understanding on complete constructor concept in Java. And if you are new to my channel, please support me by subscribing to my channel and press the bell icon to get all my updates. So we will understand what is the constructors in Java. Before we jump into understanding the constructors in Java, let's understand the meaning of constructors in general. The meaning of constructor is a person or a company that builds, design or makes something. Yes, we can take an example like we are constructing a house, we are constructing a building, we are constructing apartment, or if we take an example of a design, we are designing some plan. Exactly, even in Java, the constructor or a constructors in Java is a terminology used to construct something in our program. It is called as a constructor because it constructs the values at the time of object creation. We will see how to construct these values at the time of object creation and what exactly it constructs the values in later of this video with an example. Make sure to watch the video till the end. So in Java, the constructor is a block of code similar to method. Constructor is exactly like a method, but it is a very special type of a method which is used to initialize the objects. Hope you got it. If not, don't worry. We will understand this with an example. Constructors are called using the new keyword. So how the constructors are called? It is called with using the keyword called new. So every time an object is created using the new keyword, at least one constructor is called. A constructors in Java is a special method that is used to initialize object, and constructor is called when an instance of a class is created. Hope you got it. A constructors in Java is a special method that is used to initialize objects. A constructor is called when an instance of class is created using the new keyword. At the time of calling constructors, memory for object is allocated in the memory. When the constructor is being called with a new keyword, at that time the memory for that particular calling object, the memory for that object is allocated in the memory. It calls a default constructor if there is no constructors available in class. In such cases, if there is no constructors, like as a V developer, if we don't provide any of the constructors, or if we feel that the constructors is not useful for our requirement, Then but later on, if we create an or if we instantiate that particular object, in such cases the Java compiler provides a default constructors by default. So that's about the constructors in Java. And now let's see what are the rules for creating a Java constructors. So there are mainly three rules for creating a Java constructors. The constructor name must be same as the class name. Whatever the class name you have, the same name we have to provide it to the constructor name. Second one is the constructor must have a no explicit return type, not even a void. So it's completely a class with the open braces with some parameters. So it should not have any return type. And the last one is a Java constructor cannot be abstract, static, final and synchronized. Why? Let's think practically. If it is a final, we cannot create an object of that particular class, and if we are not creating, then we can't access the properties available in class. So it's completely applicable to each one of these keywords: abstract, static, final and synchronized. So mainly the constructor are used to initialize and utilize that particular object. So these are the rules for creating a Java constructors. Note, we can use the access modifiers while declaring a constructor. Why we have to use the access modifiers? Because it controls the object creation. In other words, we can have a private, protected, public, default for a constructors in Java. So these are the rules for creating a Java constructor. Now let's see what are the types of a Java constructors. There are three types of a constructor. There are actually two types of a constructors, but furthermore, with a developer and a compiler differentiation, there are mainly three types of a constructors. That is a default constructors. Even it is a default constructor, it is a kind of a no argument constructor. It's a quite tricky, but no issues. It's very simple to understand. No arguments constructor and parameterized constructors. These are the three different types of constructors available in Java. Now let's see what is a no argument constructors in Java. No argument constructors has a no parameters. It means it have a zero arguments in the constructors. Like we will be passing some parameters, then it is called as a parameterized constructor. If we are not providing any of the parameters, then it is called as a no argument constructors or a zero argument constructors. If no constructor is defined, the compiler creates a default no argument constructors. So I'll be telling what is the main difference between no argument constructor and default constructors once after we cover the default constructor. If a constructor is defined with or without arguments, the compiler does not create a default constructors. So whenever the programmer is defining some constructor with zero arguments or no arguments or no parameters, then it is called as a no argument constructors. Let's understand with an example. Examples of a no argument constructors. You can see the master JSkills is a class with an constructor. Here you can see this is a constructor with a no arguments. As we earlier discussed, the constructor name should have a same name as a class name. So you can observe this class name and the constructor name is the same. And it looks like a method with a two braces, and I'm printing some message. Constructor is called once it is a called. And how this master JSkills constructor is called, you can see here in the master JSkills demo class. I have created master JSkills object with the help of new keyword. You can see this is a constructor. This looks like this. So whenever we call some of the methods, like you can see here println with a open and close brace, here it is being called with the help of some object, but in the constructor we are calling with the help of new keyword. So whenever we are using new keyword while creating an object of this class, then the constructor is called. So it should print first constructor called, then I am printing. So the number and name, I'm not giving any values, so it should give as a default values, that is 0 and null. So let's see what is the output. You can say the constructor is called this. First it is called because we are creating. Once we have created that object and we are accessing the properties from this particular class with where we are not initialized any values for this number and name. We will see that in later examples. So that is why it is giving null and 0. So this is the example of no argument constructor. Let's see what is a default constructor. A constructor is a called default constructor when it does not have any parameters. So any parameters means, just now we saw no argument parameters. Then what is the difference between default constructor and no argument constructor? They both are same, but the difference is who created it. When the developer is creating, then it is called as an no argument constructor, and when the developer is not providing any no argument constructors, then the default constructor being called by the compiler. So that's what the difference between the default constructor and no argument constructors. So basically they both are same except who created it. Like when the developer is not created, then the compiler is creating a default constructor which have no parameters. So that's called as a default constructors. So this is the main difference between both of them. Now let's understand with an example again. So example of a default constructors, you can see I have created a class called a student with the two properties, that is id and name, and one method that is a display. And here in the student class, I'm not using any of the constructors. So you should note that there should be a method with a student with the same name as a class name as a student, but I have not created any constructor. I'm trying to create an object of student. So you can see easily I have created, and there are two objects I have created, that is student and student 1 and student 2. So both of them, even though we didn't provide any default constructor or no argument constructor, then the default constructor is being called by the compiler. So this is called a default constructor. And here I am just accessing id and name from the display. So you can see the output is 0 and null because I'm not providing any value for id and name, and there is no constructor being called because it's called by the default by the compiler, not by the developer. So this is the difference between default and no argument constructor. Now let's understand what is a parameterized constructor. So the parameterized constructor, a constructor which has a specific number of parameters, is called as a parameterized constructor. As we saw in earlier two types, that is no arguments and default constructor, we are not providing any of the parameters, or it contains 0 parameters. But in parameterized constructor, there will be a specific number of parameters from 1 to number of parameters, that is called as a parameterized constructor. Let's understand with an example of a parameterized constructor. So here you can see the student class has again the same example, that is student with the id and name. Here you can see I have created a student constructor with where I am passing id and name, where I am passing two parameters, that is of type integer and string, and that I am assigning it to id and name. Here you can see the constructors are used to initialize the values. So here it is initializing id value and name value, and it's displaying. So you can see while creating an object student with an integer with an id and name, created two objects, that is I am displaying. Let's see its output. So here you can see 8050 Rama is id, and 77711 is a Sita's id. So this is how the parameterized constructors looks. and while calling we will be calling with a new keyword and passing its values for whatever the parameters, whatever the number of parameters. So this is about the parameterized constructor. Hope you got the clarity on what is a constructor and what are the rules to be followed while creating a constructor, and what are the types of constructor, that is default, no argument, and parameterized constructors. So now let's see what is the need of constructors. We use a constructor to initialize the object with a default or a initial state. The default values for primitives may not be what are you looking for. Another reason to use a constructor is that it informs about a dependencies. In other words, using constructors we can request the user of that class for a required dependency. We can find out what it needs in order to use this class just by looking at the constructor. These are the needs why we are using the constructors. So it's basically uses to initialize the object with a default value, or it may be any state, whatever, whether we are passing any values or any state of an object. And another reason is dependencies, like what exactly the particular class is dependent on, particular object is dependent on any other object. So and another thing is, like, whenever we know we have the construct, what exactly that particular class requires some values. Main reason is to initialize the object with a default or initial state, or we can even pass some values. So these are the needs of why we have to use the constructors. So now let's see whether the constructor overloading is possible in Java or not. So in Java, the constructor is just like a method but without return type that we know. It can also be overloaded just like method. So it means that constructor overloading is possible in Java. The constructor overloading in Java is a technique of having more than one constructor with a different parameter list. So for example, it's completely same like a method overloading. Like if the constructor 1 is having 1 parameters, the constructor 2 is having a 2 to 3 parameters. That's what the constructor overloading. They are arranged in a way that each constructor performs a different task. Like for example, if we are passing 1 parameters, then that particular constructor belongs to some particular requirement, and or it performs a particular task. And if if we are passing 2 parameters, then that particular constructor performs a different task. In that situation, we can go for a constructor overloading. Constructor overloading in Java. In Java, a constructor is just like a method but without return type. It can also be overloaded just like a Java methods. It means that constructor overloading is possible in Java, and it is exactly same like a method overloading. So what exactly the overloading? So overloading means we are putting something, like we are making some functionality to work differently with a different parameters list. So that's what it's called as an different forms of a particular function. So the constructor overloading in Java is a technique of having more than one constructor with a different parameter list. So they are arranged in a way that each constructor performs a different task. So they are differentiated by the compile. So how they are differentiated when they are created? So they are differentiated by the compiler by the number of parameters in a list and their types. So different types. Let's understand with an example of a constructor overloading. Again the same example, student example. Here you can see the student int I and string n. So here the student constructor within 2 parameters list, and here you can see the student constructor with a 3 different parameters list. So how the compiler differentiate is by while creating object, or while calling that particular constructor, we will be passing different parameters. You can see these are 2 parameters values, and the second student object contains a 3 parameter values. This is what the constructor overloading. Let's see the output. Output will be, here it's giving 0 because age I'm not passing it, because the student class have a 3 different parameters, and the second is I am specifying 15. So this is what that particular object, student to object. So this is about the constructor overloading. Now let's understand the copy constructors in Java. So there is no copy constructors in Java. So it means that Java is not supporting copy constructors directly, but we can copy the values from one object to the another's, like copy constructors in C++. It's basically it's not supporting copy constructors in Java, but we can replicate the copy constructors in another way by copying the values from one object to the another. Java does not create a default copy constructors if we don't write your own. Like how we have discussed the default constructors earlier, like compiler will be creating a default constructor, but the default copy constructor is available in C++. But how it's possible in another way? There are many ways to copy the values from one object into the another in Java. They are by constructor, by assigning the values of one object into the another by the clone method of a object class. Let's understand the copy constructor with an example. So here again the student example. I have created the student constructor with 2 parameters, and here you can see the constructor with the same class. I am passing the same class as a parameter, and this is main important. This is the note for this copy constructor, and how we can copy from one object to the another. Like you can see the student object 1 I am creating, and with the passing values as a 222 and Rama, and the second I want to call this second constructor. At that time I am creating this student 1 object. So here what is happening, student 1 have a value ID 222 and name as a Rama, whereas student 2 where we are copying these values Rama 222 and Rama from student 1 object to the student 2 objects. We can call display method to print ID and name. So see whether the values got copied from object 1 to object 2. You can see it has copied. This is about the copy constructor, like how we can copy from one object to the another. This is how the Java supports a copy. Now let's understand the constructor chaining in Java. Constructor chaining in Java. The constructor chaining is a process of calling one constructor from another constructor with respect to current object. So chaining is nothing but like calling from one constructor to the another. Like we will be chaining one constructor to the another constructor. This process is called a constructor chaining. For example, I have 3 constructors. If I call the first constructor in the second constructor and second in the third constructor, so how this is possible? This is possible through the inheritance. For example, if you have a constructor in a superclass, that can be called into the subclass. So how and all we will see in the example. So the constructor chaining is nothing but calling the superclass constructor in the subclass constructor, or the superclass constructor in the derived constructor. So superclass constructor in the subclass constructor. So one of the main use of a constructor chaining is to avoid the duplicate code. So if we have the same if we require the same functionality what the superclass have, so already we have utilized the superclass constructor in the subclass using the constructor chaining. So that's what the use of a constructor chaining. So we can achieve constructor chaining in 2 ways, that is within the same class and from the base class, that is through the inheritance. These are the 2 ways we can do the constructor chaining. So now let's understand what are the rules for a constructor chaining. This expression should always be the first line of the constructor. So whenever we are using this function, that should be there in the first line of the constructor. So whenever we are implementing constructor chaining, at that time this expression should be in the first line of that particular constructor. The order does not matter in constructor chaining, so whatever the order it may be, but that doesn't matter. So there should be at least one constructor without this keyword. So there should be at least one constructor in the constructor chaining which does not have this keyword. So these are the main rules of a constructor chaining, and now let's see how we can call the constructor from another constructors. So the constructor calling can be done in two ways, that is using this keyword and the super keyword. So we will understand how we can call from one constructor to another constructor to achieve the constructor chaining with an example in the example constructors example video. And now let's see what are the points to be remembered in the constructor implementation. So whenever we want to implement the constructors, there are some points we should remember. The best practice of implementing constructors. So the constructors can be overloaded, that we have already saw. So it means that the constructor overloading is possible in the constructor. So whenever there is a requirement for overloading the constructors, then we can go for a constructor overloading. And the constructor can have a varachs. So varachs is a simplified version of overloading itself. So when a constructor overloading is possible, then constructors can have a varachs. Constructors can have a access specifiers. So it means that the constructors can have a public, private, default, or these access specifiers. So and an object can never be created without invoking a constructor. Without invoking any constructors, then object will never create, because we will be creating an object with the help of new keyword. So whenever we are creating an object with a new keyword with that particular class, the constructor will be invoked, and the constructor can never be accessed with the help of a dot operator, or it can never be invoked by an object. So here in the constructor, it never be called with the help of a dot operator. It's always invoked with the help of new keyword. So to write a return type for a constructor, then it is treated as a normal method. So as already you know that constructor is a special method which doesn't have any return type, not even a void. So if you give any return type, then it will be treated as a normal method, and it has to access with a dot operator only, not with a new keyword. If you have not written a constructor in a class, a default constructor with no argument is added in dot class file by the compiler. So as we already saw that if we are not providing any no argument constructor, then the compiler will create a default constructors. If you write any constructor in a class, then the compiler will not add any default constructor. So if we have already included the default constructor, then compiler will not add any of the default constructors. Constructors cannot have a modifiers, like already we have saw that abstract, final, static. These modifiers constructor will not have. Constructors are not inherited into the subclass and can never be overridden, because they are not methods and only methods overridden. So as we have saw that constructor overloading is possible, not the overriding. So if you want to use the functionality of a superclass constructor in a subclass, then we have to go for a constructor chaining, not with an overriding, as overriding is not supported in the constructor. So that's all about the constructor theoretical part I have covered, and we will understand with an example. Most of the possible examples I'll be covering in the next video. And if you still have any doubts, please drop in the comment box, and if I missed any topic in the constructor, please type that particular concept of a constructor in the comment box. I'll come up with that video and include in a separate video. Whatever I'm missing, I'll cover everything. Hope you all understood about the constructor and its rules and type of constructors and copy constructor, constructor overloading and constructor chaining. I hope everything you have understood. If you're still struggling and if you still have any of small doubt also, you can comment in the comment box. I will make sure to answer each one of you. So thanks for watching, and if you really think this video is a very helpful for you, please like this video and share with your friends. And if you are new to my channel, please subscribe to my channel. I heartily welcome you all, and press the bell icon to get all my updates. Thanks again for watching.